Welcome then to this first panel discussion of the day here at Day 2 of Procurement and Supply Chain Live London 2023. This panel is the Strategic Sourcing Forum, and we've got some fantastic guests and panelists here to discuss the topic and hopefully to have a conversation, perhaps even a debate or a difference of opinion on the strategies and trends in strategic sourcing that we hopefully provide some insights that we can all go away with. Okay, joining me on the far right of the stage first is Milind Taylor. He's Global Head Services Procurement and Vendor Management at Diebold Nixdorf. In the centre we have Andrew Turner, Global Head of Indirect Procurement at JLL. And to my immediate right, Ben Godfrey. He's Vice President Procurement at Rolls-Royce. Please welcome your panel. Okay, now it says here on my script that strategic sourcing is a critical component of procurement for organisations looking to optimise their supply chain operations and extract maximum value from their suppliers. So this discussion will explore best practices and strategies for success, as well as all the latest trends and innovative approaches shaping the field. So, to begin, Ben, why is strategic sourcing so important?
Thank you. Why is strategic sourcing so important? Increasingly, we're all faced with an ever-changing world. I'm sure there's lots of discussions yesterday and today about resilience and challenges, but our shareholders, our stakeholders, need to perform their businesses, their operations, and increasingly they need value. And that value comes from our external environment. In Rolls-Royce's case, we buy 75% of the product that goes into an aeroplane engine. We buy that. It's 20,000 parts. So you can imagine the coordination of bringing that together to drive value, and that's not just cost. That's that resilience piece, that's the delivery, it's quality, it's innovation, it's all of those things. So it's a broad church, but incredibly important to us.
Same question to Andrew.
Yeah, I think if you take a JLL example, over $12 billion of our spend is with third-party suppliers. So they're incredibly critical to our operations and also our overall proposition as an organisation. And yeah, building from what Ben mentioned, if you think about it, that's not only just the cost, but it's also the risk management, it's the quality, it's the ESG, and how we're meeting those commitments that we've signed up to as an organisation and facing, got public attention to. And I think the other point about strategic sourcing is you're doing it properly and you're doing it correctly. It's also set up so that you can evolve and have the flexibility to deal with how your business changes, whether they're having good times, bad times, or whatever faces them over, the short to medium to long term.
And Milind.
So to add to what my panel member said, I think it makes or break the organization. And last 3 years, if you see from the pandemic, a lot of organizations who did not get their strategic sourcing right, they just couldn't survive the difficult times that were there. So I guess the reason strategic sourcing is for a reason, right? That it's very strategic, and if you don't get it right, it would be difficult for you to survive in this difficult time. So that's why I would say it's absolutely critical to get this aspect of your business right.
Okay. Now, how do we ensure then, we've established the importance of strategic sourcing. How can we ensure that those sourcing efforts align with the overall business objectives and goals of an organisation? Andrew, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really key. I mean, if you look at an organisation, there's an awful lot that you can understand around what you need to achieve from an investor's perspective and what you've signed up to and how you need to align to that. So whether that's profit growth, whether it's revenue growth, it's supporting the development of centralisation to achieve wider goals. But it's also really staying close to your senior leaders as well and understanding what they're personally there to do. And I think there's two areas to that. One is what their wider goals are, but also what's their personal ambitions and that they've been brought in to achieve. And I think having that great partnership there, really understanding it, aligning what you need to achieve from a procurement perspective and tying it to those goals, that's how you get your plan, your value, and you know what you need to go off to achieve and to deliver what we talked about around the benefits of strategic sourcing.
There's lots of nodding of heads. Anyone disagree or have anything to add to that?
No, absolutely. I guess no disagreement on that part. It has to flow down from the organizational objective. The sourcing team in general cannot have their goals in isolation. So for us, it starts right from what are the strategic objectives that the company wants to accomplish, right? At a global level, at a company level, and then it percolates down at a BU level, at a functional level, and then for each of them, you need to have a separate strategy, right? Depending on what category you are managing, what geography, everything has its own nuances, but then it all starts with the organizational objectives and then percolates down right to the category level. If that alignment is missing, then of course, there will be a lot of chaos and confusion, I believe.
And I think to add to that, we at Rolls-Royce, we don't see it as we have to align with the business objectives. It's a real core competence for us because we buy 75-80% of the product in. We've got that huge complex supply chain and operation. So it's not a case of having to align and perhaps this narrative of procurement having to align with the business. It's the same thing for us, and that's the way we talk about it and the way we think about it.
That's a good point, and you talked there about the extent of the relationship and reliance you have on your suppliers. So how do you go about making sure that those relationships are strong and also maximising the value that they can deliver? Yeah, well, I was asking you. Yeah,
I thought you were. I thought you were. It's a good question. I mean, every case will be different, and that's not a cop-out. But the point there is you have to really understand your market. I think you were just mentioning, you have different categories, you have different commodities. So you've got to start with that wider analysis of your market and then how the suppliers play there. In an environment where you have more choice, it's a more transactional environment, the way you manage your supplier relationships is different. In some of my categories, I have one or two suppliers. We contract with them as partners for the life of a program, which will be 30, 40, 50 years, effectively. And you have to put a lot of effort into managing those relationships and aligning the goals. And I hope anyone didn't think I sort of made it sound easy internally. But clearly when there's a barrier in the organisation and there's a profit and a margin and the buyer wants the price lower and the guy wants the price higher. How you find the common ground, how you find the mutual value, the route to market for the technology, those are the conversations that add mutual benefit and value. And more of our supply chain's in that camp because it's complex stuff.
Yeah.
But it's important to differentiate and be clear in your mind kind of which strategy you're taking at which point in time in your cycle.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think Ben raises a really good point. I think the fundamental is what are those suppliers that you want to have a partnership with, right? There is a large number of suppliers who actually, to go to the market on a periodic basis and review the solutions or to actually change out what's being provided to evolve and innovate isn't a bad thing, and that's there. But actually where we do have those partners that we do want to create long-term value with is building that appropriate structure. So how do you get the right teams together to have that regular cadence? How do you build a clear plan that understands what value it is? And I think the other one I've seen quite a lot recently as well is, we put in agreements, 3-5 years into now. Well, your organisation's changed significantly over that time. And how do you make sure that you're also educating on what value is and how it's evolving within your business so that you don't get to a point in time when that contract comes up where you start to look at that contract again and they're so totally disconnected from the business that you're trying to amend and remediate. So I think it has to be very organic, and you also need to appreciate that the business or your suppliers need to appreciate where your business is going as well, so they stay on the pulse and on track.
I think you raise an interesting point on the idea of the contract. I mean, the concept of enforcing clauses as sort of carrots and sticks, is common. But in a true long-term strategic relationship, the document as written often doesn't reflect the relationship in its fullness. And trying to document a relationship that ultimately has to be underpinned by a degree of mutual trust in a 40 or 60-page document is incredibly difficult, actually. And just as a contention that I'm sure none of the lawyers in the room would agree with me, actually the simpler those documents are, often the better. But how you manage the transitions of relationships, because people will change in those kind of timeframes, becomes as crucial as how good you are at legally documenting and drafting a head of terms that you share between yourselves.
Right, and I think if you want to have it a strategic relationship, I guess it's also determined by the business or the economic condition. And I'll give you a very simple example, which I'm sure a lot of us would be able to relate, is logistics as a category, right? 3 years ago, before COVID, if somebody asked me logistics, it's a commodity, right? There are hundreds of suppliers, and somebody who has a $200 million spend, I'm sure I can get another 200 suppliers lined up. But I think we realized during the COVID period that it is not a commodity. If you don't have a real strategic relationship with the suppliers, you just would not have been able to move it. So I remember when at the onset of the COVID, there were issues, there was so much of internal pressure from our business team or the operations team, change the suppliers, get more suppliers on board, get new ones. Our current suppliers are not able to manage it. I'm sure all of us went through that. But from a strategic perspective, we stuck to our core suppliers with whom we had relationships for years. We worked with them to ensure that we got capacities, we were able to move stuff. Not all the time, of course, because there was not enough capacity, there were not enough planes flying from China into Europe, but all those constraints were there, but we stuck with that relationship. It was not that the pressure of COVID or unavailability of the resources made us add new suppliers. And I'm sure if we would have added it, we would have been in much more difficult situation, because those who did that, they just were not able to get capacity because the suppliers stuck to their customers who stuck with them during the difficult time. And that's where were able to move and build on and get more stuff moving out. So I think it's also determined by the business conditions and not taking any knee-jerk reaction in the wake of such crisis situation.
Do we feel that the pandemic strengthened some of those relationships?
I would say it brought to fore what the real relationships are or what the real partners are. Because in pandemic, we really could figure out which suppliers were really in the spirit of partnership and not just a relationship which is a buy and sell relationship. So that to me was the biggest learning out of pandemic. And now we know who are the partners who we really want to grow with. So to me, that was the biggest learning out of the pandemic. Everything else aside, but it brought the true partnerships to fore.
I think I'd say it broke some as well.
Yeah.
The period where money was cheap, so cheap that the government were giving it away, that stopped. And actually, the tide went down and there were just a number of suppliers that couldn't survive. So all of those ideas about sort of wanting to work with guys, it's like, yeah, we do. We love you. You've worked with us for a long time, but you're no longer a viable business and we have to react and protect our interests. So I think it was both. I think it's a really good point to say it strengthened and revealed the relationship in some instances, but I think it also revealed in our supply chain a number of businesses that are not viable, frankly, and therefore we've had to react and recover those positions.
Yeah. Is that something you've experienced as well, Andrew?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think building on from the comments that raised, I think the pandemic and then also what happened last year is probably revealed more about the level of risk that sits within the supply chains, and understanding that actually that's quite a broad topic and different areas. So probably bring that more to the front, that needs to be kind of addressed and managed or understood more, not just by procurement but the wider business as well.
Okay, thank you. Now, before I move on to the next topic of conversation here, we are going to allow questions from the audience. So if anyone does have a question, please put your hand up. And then, we have questions already. Okay, can we get the microphone out, actually? Can you just raise your hand so we can see you again? Just second or third row in the centre there. And if you can just please state your name and where you're from, just for our panel's benefit. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Napreet. I work with Tata Consultancy. I'm head of supply chain there. I think because we spoke a lot about pandemic and how we got a posture of how
So could you just hold the mic a little
how
bit closer?
good our supply chain is. I think while initially strategic sourcing was driven through cost, quality, and delivery, but there were other elements like the risk posture, financial risk, sustainability risk, and other targets. Now, considering those addition of drivers, how are you looking into your relationship with additional data sets or points to evaluate your risk posture, or looking into that you should be sourcing from these places from sustainability perspective? So what's the addition of those paradigms into your sourcing aspect?
Yeah, if I go first, I think sort of your question around the broadening, perhaps, of the goals and the objectives. I think one thing I'd say, I think it's always been so. I think it's always been more than quality, cost, delivery. But I think you're right, the sort of demands on the sourcing professional only increase. I think we do a few things that I'd say. So we invest a huge amount of time into dialogue and discussions with our supply chain on those topics. We're humble enough to know that we don't have all the answers on sustainability, as an example. So that's a really powerful data source that we have that's there for us to tap into if we only ask. So we do that a lot. But we do a lot of market scanning. We do a lot of, we pay for services, and there are lots of people out there that offer services. So you almost need a strategic sourcing plan for which services you want to buy into, but that's maybe a bit of a rabbit hole. But you've got to think about where those data insights come from, geopolitically, risk scanning, how you want to react. So I guess it's a mix really of sort of intrinsic and internal to us and the supply chain, and then that much broader environment. And we're humble enough to sort of be very open-minded as to where those data sets come from and how we can aggregate them and use them usefully.
Just to follow up on that, how are you handling the extended supply chain in terms of tracing? Like, you would know your suppliers, but they might be sourcing certain materials from their further suppliers. So
Sure.
what element of changes you have brought in to eliminate that extended supply chain?
Yeah, very tough, and very pertinent to me right now. The environment of sanctions and export control is only restricting options. We work with a number of third parties that help us map our supply chain. They do that for a variety of techniques. Some is data synthesis, big data, and some is very sort of specific work, mapping a supply chain for you. That's not easy. There are tens of thousands of parts in a bill of material for an engine, so supply chain's 4 or 5 layers deep. Getting to the very bottom of your supply chain at a raw material level is a real challenge. There's announcements at Europe now regarding sanctions on iron and steel. All of us in the aerospace industry are scratching our heads to say, well, how are we going to work through that? And the other thing we do, and the reason for sort of telling that little bit of a story, is we collaborate with our peers there. We collaborate with our customers, because that's a common problem. Our whole supply chain in the industry will grind to a halt if everything's getting stuck at customs. So there's no point us trying to figure that out on our own. So we talk to Airbus, GE, Boeing, and we come together and say, well, how do we all respond to those challenges, and where do industry standards start to emerge?
Thank you.
And I think, I mean, just to go back to the question, I think the topics of risk and ESG, they're not new topics. We've probably been asking them for many years. I think what's probably happened is the level and approach that we look at them. So, a couple of years ago, we probably said, do you have an environmental policy? Now we're probably moving into an era where we're getting to actually, if we look at emissions, measuring the actual emissions the company does, or ideally getting to a product and service level scope of emissions. I think the point that brings is that gives us more and more data around how we make options. But actually, from a procurement perspective, if you look at, say, cost and going down to zero emissions in carbon, they complement each other, right? It's reusing, it's reducing, it's looking at more efficient and effective options. So the key bit is how do you consider all those factors and then put that into our dialogue? So whether it goes back to our start of our conversation, an appropriate business partnership and making it relevant to the organisation, or if you look at it in SRM, and how do you go back, taking that example to, well, look, this is where your emissions are. We've got a journey that we need to be to net zero in 20 years' time, but we need to hit these targets. How do we partner together and work on that to meet that? So I think there is more data. There's a lot more. I would say the topics haven't changed, but I think the consideration has grown. But I think the opportunities, or the way that you can use that to empower what we as professionals need to do is also highly pertinent.
Right. And I think just to add, I think the other aspect is the internal aspect of it in terms of educating your internal stakeholders. I think that, to me, what I've seen has been a bigger challenge because you need to get the conflicting goals and objectives together, right? You need to educate your business stakeholders because some of them are at times driven by profitability. Yeah, I need to see X percentage improvement in my profitability, so I will, to your question, right, I will go and buy it from the cheapest supplier. Not really cheapest, but in terms of what would help me in terms of getting my gross profit margins, right, numbers. And that's where the whole education of explaining them the new regulatory changes, the new risk and the risks that come in because of all the changes that are going on. That's been a bigger challenge for me internally in terms of getting the stakeholders up to speed and making them see the same way as procurement sees it. It's not something which procurement was not aware about. We've been doing it. We've been aware about ESG goals. We've been aware about risk. But now it's more about getting the entire organization to see in the same way so that everyone can go in the same direction.
Okay.
Sorry, just to add, I think one final point. in a day where you can sort of find anything out in 30 seconds, with the phone in your pocket, there's always too much information. And, those people that are supporting supply chains and think about it, the teams that can crack making that really simple and specific to me, they're going to make a killing, frankly. So that's my challenge to anybody that's sort of thinking in that space. Make it simple and specific that I can use it and interpret it, and that's the way forward.
Okay, so everyone can reach out to Ben.Godfrey, yeah? That's the one. I'll certainly be doing a bit of homework on that later on, thank you. We're going to go back to the topic here then. You're talking about technology, which brings us nicely into artificial intelligence and machine learning. We could have a whole day dedicated to this, I'm sure, but let's gauge your views on what role those emerging technologies can and will play in strategic sourcing. I'll go to Andrew first.
Yeah, I think, look, we've probably all played around with various tools already and know some of the user cases we can do, whether it's helping to find suppliers or try to draft a rough specification. And I think, again, it's great, and we're probably seeing a lot more progress, but it's still also probably pretty crude, right? But we all realize the long-term potential. For me, I think when I look at strategic sourcing, I think we'll probably take a Centurion approach to that. And what I mean is, if you look at chess as an example, when automated chess first came on, the computer always beat humans. Then what happened is they started to do humans and computers together against computers, and they were actually able to beat computers most of the time. And I think if you look at that from a procurement perspective and you look at it from a strategic sourcing lens, then actually what we'll see is there's probably elements that computers and automation can do a lot better than what the human can do. But then there's also huge strengths that we as humans have got about getting the things delivered and done. So you think about all the soft skills, the negotiation, the different approaches that you can take to deliver the results and how to do that. And I guess that's probably where we've got to try to hope to get to as a utopian is if there's elements where we can have, automation, AI doing stuff like instead of going to 5 to 8 suppliers, they go to 80 suppliers. If they can do checks every day or every periodic basis opposed to once or 3 years, depending on what the contract life is, they're doing that. And then we're selling that internally to the business. We're getting people to understand the ideas and the concepts. That's where we can probably be more effective and efficient than we've been. And also where we've all wanted to go to for a long time, right? To make it pain-free.
Really?
To be very honest, I'm absolutely confused in terms of the technology. It's too many options, and nothing is I've genuinely seen as a used case which can show real value. Every technology provider that I have spoken to in last, let's say, couple of years, all fancy presentations, but nothing turns out and gives it in the terms of ROI. So honestly, I don't have an answer in terms of what it is. I believe that yes, it will help. Technology should help, but at this stage, I think it's too early to be able to see what genuinely we would be able to put into practice. What I see is, and what we've started doing is, at least on the Procop side, which is the basic, very, very mundane daily stuff in terms of converting requisitions to POs or sending out the purchase orders to the suppliers. We are using RPA and AI to kind of do that part of it, cleaning up of the MDM data and other stuff, but nothing really which is strategic in nature. As of now, I haven't seen the benefit or any use case wherein AI can give me a category plan for, say, an IT as a category. I haven't seen that thing. So I think it's a little in future that we would see really AI and or technology really helping us on the strategic sourcing stuff, because I believe IT can do only as much, or technology can only do as much, because there's a lot of things that the strategic sourcing does is scanning of the environment, relating it with your business, and taking a decision, which will take some time. So I'm a little bit skeptic, but unless somebody proves me wrong.
I think we know where you stand on this, but anything to add?
I'm super excited by the opportunity. I don't think it will revolutionise kind of the way companies work or change the job. In its core, I think the point made is that I think it will make us more efficient. It will open up some new opportunities. So I think those are things that I look forward to. It also starts to think about, okay, the sort of procurement professional as was, is now, and of the future. You're going to have to be more familiar with the concepts and the ideas, and actually may be able to do a little bit in the space within your teams. Because otherwise, as a buyer, you're buying something you just don't understand, which is never a good idea.
What do our esteemed audience feel about this? Do we feel that AI is going to make a significant difference in strategic sourcing? If you think yes, you can just raise your hands. Oh, let's see, what's that? That's probably, what, 20%, if that? For the benefit of our virtual audience, 20% maximum thought that AI was going to have a significant impact on strategic sourcing. So interesting to see, and I think that's clearly reflected in the views of the panel here as well. Right, when it comes to strategic sourcing, obviously it's really important to get speed and agility, but it's also really important to have careful analysis and due diligence. So how do you balance those two conflicting demands in some ways? Milind, come to you first.
So I would say start with the right team working on that category from a strategic sourcing perspective, because it's not a procurement way, I would say. Strategic sourcing is not something which is only a procurement responsibility. Yes, it's led by procurement, but it's always a collaborative one. So if you don't have the right functional team, cross-functional team working on that strategic sourcing of the whole process, then it ends up becoming just a procurement-led initiative or a procurement decision, which is always, let's say, counterproductive or not helpful to the organization. So for me, the step one is to get the right cross-functional team, team who can understand the entire value chain, all the aspects of the strategic sourcing and the impact that it will have, which then ensures that all the decisions that are being made are taken in light of the end objective that we want to accomplish. So if you want lower cost, which I understand will be the case sometimes, then your decision will be done in a particular way. But if your priority is very high quality, which I believe someone like Andrew, who has a very mission critical kind of services, then it's a different approach. So I guess that's the way we would balance it out, is by having the right cross-functional team, in the process and defining the objectives very clearly.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think from my side, I think first of all, it's always challenge that assumption around the speed piece, right? Because I think in my career I've experienced a lot where maybe you have mid-level managers who want something done because they've got the budget and they want to get it signed off and done. But actually, if you speak to the senior leader around it, actually this is a small part in a bigger play, and actually we need to be a lot more strategic, because where that requirement is today and where it's going is completely different. And if we haven't future-proofed and done that properly, then we could actually be leading to more pain and longer timeframes in the future. So I always kind of think that's the one to challenge. I think the second bit then is, as procurement leaders and everybody in the room is, what's our plans and what have we got? And I think you'll find there's probably always 10, 11 initiatives that are going to be needle-moving differences, and then the rest of it will make a bit of an impact, but probably not to this extent that you think. And I think if you have clear plans and and you've done your right socialization, you can control and leverage those big ones. The other ones, if we have to do it quite quick and dirty and we've got to help speed it over the line, then sometimes we've got to do that. I think the bit we have to think about is how can we be smart to really make that procurement process as fast as possible, so that without losing any effectiveness and efficiency. And that's stuff like, standard contract templates, pre-approved suppliers wherever applicable, all the things that we can do to kind of make that kind of as nimble as possible without, kind of reinventing the wheel every time.
Yeah, I think the point on challenging speed is good, and the reason I say that is speed only comes from planning and preparation, in my opinion, every walk of life, but particularly here. So if I may, I give you a headline when you think I'm arguing with myself. So during the COVID pandemic, in a mature commodity, I placed in a week $3 billion worth of business, signed contracts, and I saved 20%. Okay, so you said speed's bad. It took me 12 months of planning with 100 people to figure out how to do that, how to wire our systems, because we're in COVID and we couldn't do what we normally do, which is invite everyone into a conference centre and let them see the whites of their eyes to drive competition. So it took 12 months to plan that, and that was everything from how we interacted with the suppliers, how we made our decision models something that could work remotely, working with our stakeholders, identifying all of those things that were important, because it wasn't just a cost story by any means. So I think to illustrate the point, the speed only comes at the end, once you've done the work. And I think that's a really important message for people to digest in this environment.
So it's a marathon with a sprint finish. Yeah.
And just to add, Scott, I guess, on the previous topic where we were talking about technology, I think this is where technology really can help in terms of when we are talking about speed and agility. That's where I believe AI and technology would be able to give the data today, which takes a bit of time, right? In order to scan the entire environment, to make, analyze the data points, I guess that's where technology can give the outcomes basis which a person can take the decision faster. Today, if you see the category managers or the strategic sourcing managers spend a lot of time collecting data, analyzing data, and then it's the 30% of it is genuinely the intelligent part of it, right? So if you really want to get the speed and agility, that's where technology can come in, wherein it comes in as dashboard, all the information is available. So the 70% of the work that is manual work is eliminated, and then the person can spend time in doing the strategic thinking. So that's where I think technology will help in bringing speed and agility.
And it's role dependent, right? So if I'm doing this job that I do today for an F1 company, and the mission critical thing for us is to be able to redesign a splitter or a fairing over the weekend and get it produced and on the car for the next weekend, because otherwise we're 2 points of a second slower than everybody else, then the way I set up and how I do my supply chain and the things I measure and I monitor and prioritize are entirely different from wanting to make 1,000 large aerospace engines a year. So it comes back to it depends, but you've really got to think about the thing that's most important to you, and therefore you'll set up accordingly.
Well, the points I suppose there were, we were comparing speed and agility with the need to have careful analysis and due diligence. Now, I don't imagine that anyone standing on here is going to say that that due diligence doesn't matter, but there is a balancing, right?
Absolutely.
So I don't think we actually talked about the diligence side of things. We focused a lot on the speed. So let's talk about that. Due diligence. How important is that, and how has that position changed? Has that become more important? Is it becoming more important, or are other factors taking priority?
Not for us. Quality first, safety first. You make an aeroplane engine, you fly millions of people around the world. So the long list of things that get added to the requirements, never replace that one for us.
I think Milind alluded to that earlier as well, saying sort of mission critical like that. But Milind, what's your view on that?
So due diligence for us has been one of the important factors when we get the supplier onboarding, right? So we do all the checks in terms of GDPR, in terms of the red flags, et cetera. But then again, last 3 years, the process has become more stringent, wherein we are trying to continuously evaluate all our top suppliers. Again, we can't evaluate the 3,000 or 5,000 suppliers that I have, but at least the top 200, top 300, we kind of keep on doing due diligence on their financial capabilities, on their operational feasibilities, it's more frequent. So it's more like earlier it used to be, okay, we will do it every 24 months. Now it's like every 6 months, we look at all the critical suppliers, ask for the details, and to evaluate if they are in a stable position or not. Not just financially, but operationally as well as and all the other parameters. So that's kind of become more critical off late with the pandemic, because we've seen a lot of our suppliers who've been with us for 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years. They just all of a sudden, from one day to the other, they stopped. They just couldn't function. For various reasons, but yeah, that's kind of driving us to this point that the due diligence of our suppliers has to be a continuous exercise, and not like one of every 24 months we review the suppliers for their stability.
Andrew, is that the same for you, Andrew? Have you had an increased focus on that, looking into the suppliers?
Yeah, I think so. I think, for a lot of organisations probably out there, the level of risk has probably changed and also grown, and the impacts of that has grown. I think what I've probably seen is how we understand and measure risk is probably also, when we do our due diligence, sort of increased significantly. I would also say that how we focus more on what the risks are associated specifically with that requirement than a broad brush has also become more lasered in. And then I think to the points of the rest of the panel is, it's making sure that's kind of almost living and breathing organic, as opposed to we just do that at one point in time and then we review periodically. It's a lot more, either regular reviewing or ongoing to assess and continue, as opposed to it being sort of an academic exercise.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions from the audience, please? I'm hoping we do. Any questions? Yes, lady in the front row. If we please state your name and where you're from, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your insights. Fantastic, a lot to digest. My name is Orla Ryan, and I work in low and lower income countries, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and so on, primarily with women who run small businesses. They have a need, a demand, if you like, to have access to markets for export, because more often than not, they might not have the disposable income locally, so they need to do inter-regional trade and international trade. Thinking about those women and thinking of your organisations as potential buyers, if you like, what is the scope for them to engage with you? What do they need to know?
I'm happy to start now. So we've done a lot of partnership with We Connect and also a number of other diverse and organisations to help promote that. I think what we've tried to do quite heavily is 2 areas to help support that. One is how do we make sure that we lower our thresholds and our requirements so that we can enable organisations to do that, and appreciate that there are very different profile to large enterprise organisations. And then the other one we've tried to do as well is we've actually created a financial product to help give supply chain financing to diverse organisations to also understand that, again, where you're going on to a larger organisation, there's obviously maybe more commitments that are larger than your organisation maybe have to help. So how do we help support and finance that? So yeah, we've been really trying to partner with those organisations that represent these communities to understand what the common issues are, and therefore how do we try to address those so that we can enable them and bring them into our organisation.
So for us, we do measure minority spend or minority-owned suppliers. I mean, as a spend at a global level. So that's if when we are doing a supplier onboarding or supplier evaluation process, our evaluation process does incorporate that. So if there are any minority-owned suppliers that are coming in, as Andrew said, some of the requirements are relaxed in terms of the spend, in terms of their financial stability, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a different lens that's applied, in terms of evaluating those kind of suppliers. So yes, there is some kind of a process in place to kind of see that they are not being, let's say, left behind by the big Bs of the big companies.
We have similar schemes in terms of supporting sort of diversity in our supply chain, small, medium enterprises. So we have the same kind of schemes. I think what I'd also say is we do a lot with various governments around the world to incentivise jobs in our supply chain and to sort of help and understand that as we secure the supply chain. And then personally, we do a lot. So we have people that have worked for us. There's an example actually, a young lady that worked for us has left us, but we support her financially and with mentorship, and she's actually got a startup in Africa, which is an energy startup, which is employing, I think at the last count, she's got about 30 or 40 people. So we help her directly, as well as those sort of more corporate kind of measures and schemes that have been mentioned.
Any more questions? Yes. Can we get the microphone? Just keep your hand up. Yeah, just about 6 rows back on the left. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Cheryl Laverick. I'm from JLR. We've spoken about the need to establish extremely long-term contracts in some areas for strategic partners and strategic commodities and category areas, but we've also spoken a lot about the need to be able to move organically and adapt to change. So thoughts on how we can balance those 2 factors?
So again, first to your question around long-term, extremely long-term contracts, I'm not a big favor, in big favor of having huge, long-term contracts, right? The business environment is changing very fast or keeps on changing very fast. So I guess, again, I'm not sure what your definition of long is. For me, anything beyond 3 years is a risk, right, in the current scheme of things. So to me, we try and keep all our contracts either evergreen, which means we will review the SOWs or the scope documents every year, depending on what the market situation is, but no long-term commitments. So as of now, at least that's the stand that we've been taking is not giving long-term commitments. Of course, on certain commodities, wherein we need to kind of have a long-term view, we do have partnerships wherein we work with our suppliers on the pricing. So, one of the things is steel. We manufacture ATM, so we buy a lot of steel. In those cases, if you see the pricing has been impacted by a lot of things happening in China, I guess in Europe as well. In that situation, we've had partnership with our suppliers, but not on the cost aspects. The cost is something which is completely transparent, wherein we work with them to drive the pricing depending on what the should cost analysis tells us. So that's the way we balance it.
And I really think it depends on the category, the industry, and then also what your stakeholders' goals are. I mean, if you take what Ben was saying, right, because of the nature of Rolls-Royce and probably some of their suppliers, you have to have long-term contracts because there's no other option. You need to do that. If you're buying influencers, for example, you're not going to be doing a 30-year contract because it's probably irrelevant after a couple of months. So you have to have that level of pragmatism, right? I think the key bit for us is we've got to understand what we think the right strategy is based on all of those dynamics, but then also how do we have the smartness that we can be robust enough to protect ourselves in all those different scenarios, or have the ability to reopen contracts if we do think the market's going to change, or periodically say, look, we're not going to do anything after this point in time because we do want to go back and reassess. But again, that's in our gift to work through, right, and to determine.
Nothing particularly to add to
Okay.
what my colleagues have shared.
Okay, right. Thank you for your question. I think that's going to bring us nicely to an end, actually. It's been a fantastic, really interesting session. Thank you so much to Milind, Andrew, and to Ben. Thank you.